Welcome back to the Go Have Good Sex podcast, the show where faith and pleasure finally stop fighting. I'm Angela, the Christian Sexpert, sex coach, truth teller, and your new favorite bedtime devotional. If you're ready to go deeper, check out my resources for couples and individuals, from my free 15-minute coaching consults to spicy but faith-friendly resources like the Marriage Playdate, to my Patreon, where I teach you all the things your church aunties never told you about. And yeah, you know I've got it covered with merch, journals, bookmarks, and everything in between at TheChristianSexpert.com. So whether you're here to learn, to heal, or to spice things up with scripture and sass, I'm your girl, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into today's episode, and remember, go have good sex. Hi friends, welcome back to the Go Have Good Sex podcast featuring me, the Christian Sexpert. I am so happy that you're here, and I am so happy that my friend Ashley Hudson is back with us today. Ashley is a lover of Jesus and a licensed clinical social worker. She lives in Denver with her high school sweetheart and two beautiful children. Through her practice, Pearl and Process, Ashley treats trauma, difficulties with sexual functioning, and perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Ashley strives to equip individuals and their support systems to properly detect and respond to life's challenges with compassion and kindness. Ashley provides both virtual and in-person therapy to folks in Colorado, Texas, and North Carolina, and has written several books available through Amazon. Ashley is the first guest to make a second appearance on our podcast because you guys had so many questions after her first appearance. So the first episode that we did together was raising sexually healthy kids. And there were so many questions that I said, Ashley, we need to do a part 2. We didn't get to talk about everything. And so we put together a bunch of questions that you all had for her. So all of the questions today are going to be listener submitted questions. So Ashley, thank you for being back.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
I am too. All right. So we did talk about this a bit in part 1 of our conversation, but one of the most common questions about raising sexually healthy kids is always, what's the best age to start the conversation?
Yeah, we did talk about that last time. We kind of tried to bust the myth that it's a one-time conversation, like the talk, and instead it's like thousands and thousands of 1-minute talks. And really the conversation is less of a conversation and more just nuanced little words, starting from birth on, with labeling genitals and body parts and teaching body boundaries and things of that nature. And that begins when they are first born and we're starting to teach them that they live in a body, and here's what their body does, and here are the different sensations that you can experience in your body, and how those sensations can alert you of different emotional experiences that you're also having. And so it kind of takes different shapes throughout the lifespan. But as far as just learning about, where your genitals are and what they are, and basic hygiene, that starts really early before babies can even talk. And it progresses as they begin to develop language, and eventually maybe begin asking questions.
I think part of the reason that we keep getting this question over and over, and I say we as people who talk about sex and sex ed all the time for our jobs, is my specialty isn't even talking to kids about sex. It's really the marriage portion of the equation. But I keep getting asked the question because people think, well, you talk about sex, and so you must know how to talk to kids. And I had my own bit of a meltdown actually after Ashley and I recorded the last episode, because literally that day, my kid, we had a very big conversation about like intercourse and how sex actually happens, and he made a statement, and I was like, in my head I'm like, don't freak out, because other parents would like just take the statement at face value and freak out. And so I'm in my head, I'm like, this is like God's cosmic joke on me right now or something.
Yeah,
I'm being punked because I just recorded this podcast.
right.
But I, instead
Funny.
of responding with like, why would you say that to my kid, I was like, what makes you say, like, why? I responded with curiosity, and he totally didn't mean the statement, his intent behind the statement was completely different than the statement itself, which I think when it comes to this subject, parents get really anxious about. And
Mm.
in that kind of theme of our kids will say something and then we get anxious, but then we also get anxious when our kids aren't saying anything. So one of the listener questions was like, my kid knows about like the sperm and the egg, and like the basic physiology stuff, but they really haven't asked much of anything else. So how do you start or continue a dialogue, especially when they're a bit older, like 8, 9, and 10, and they aren't asking questions?
Yeah. I mean, some kids are just more quiet in general, or just, less likely to converse about emotions or big questions. And so I mean, I love to say silence is not always golden. We don't always want silence. In fact, silence breeds shame usually. However, when the kiddo is the one that is trotting through life and they want to play with dolls and, like they aren't yet interested in those things, I don't know that we need to become anxious about their, where they're at. That God has designed all of us uniquely, including our kids, and He is not surprised by their developmental pathway and how it's um, unfolding. I will say, I think utilizing stories can be really helpful, whether it's books or media, just asking your kiddo questions like, how do you think that baby, became part of this family? Or, we've suggested some materials from our last episode we did, and I'm sure you will list them again, but different books can be a great conversation starter with the kiddos. And, you know, even just so you see kids at school, or you hear your kiddo say they heard another classmate said something, you can say, well, what do you think about that? Um, in sex therapy, we're taught what's called the Plicit model, and that's how we approach sex therapy with people. And the first stage is permission, which is literally just saying things like penis and vagina and sex and intercourse and all of the things, which can make people feel uncomfortable. But on the other hand, it also gives the notion or the posture in a nuanced way that, hey, there's permission to talk about it here. And so opening up those spaces, using language that's real and direct and factual, and just letting them know, like, you're there to talk about it and you're curious about their thoughts is important.
I think that normalizing words and things like that is so important in a group that Ashley and I are both a part of. I had posted a cartoon drawing of a female clitoris, not that there's a male clitoris, but a female sex organ. I posted, a cartoon drawing of an erect clitoris and flaccid, and women were losing their minds in the comments because they were calling it explicit material and basically pornography. And I'm like, y'all, this is a body part on a body that, like, this is a group for women only. For
Mhm.
adult women, this is a
Mhm.
part on your body. This is not
Mhm.
a photograph.
Right.
It's a cartoon, and y'all are freaking out, and that tells me something about the sex education that you are offering your children.
Yeah, that's concerning, right?
When you freak out as an
Mhm.
adult about an illustration of a body part that should be normalized just like an elbow or an eyeball, it tells me that you're still carrying a lot of the shame, which leads into another of our listener questions. Is one of the things that we talked about in the last episode is, I think the question was kind of like, well, where do we start with like talking to our kids about sex ed? And your response was fantastic, was, well, you have to first start healing your own relationship with your sexual self so that you can pass down healthy things to your kids.
Mhm.
And somebody's question was, it was so great because she said, what are parents who are already parents to do while healing themselves at the same time, they need to be conversing with and teaching their growing children. They can't just wait until they themselves are fully healed if their children are already in an age where these conversations are necessary.
Yeah.
So if your kid is already 8, 9, 10, 15, 16, and you're realizing, oh, I freaked out about an illustration of a clitoris. Ooh, I probably have something that still needs healed. How do we balance both of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think well, both can happen at the same time. Both need to happen at the same time, right? Um, I was talking to Dr. Tina Sellers recently, and we were talking about, we really only have to be a year or two ahead of our kids developmentally. Um, and if we aren't, that's okay. They're resources. So if you are in the midst of your own healing journey, which we all are, we're in the midst of a redemptive story. We're being sanctified, glory to glory. That's like a process. That's not something that's going to happen in 5 minutes or in a day or in a therapy or coaching session. That's something that is going to be an ongoing experience for you. So my advice is often to have a council of many advisors, right? That's what the Bible tells us to do. So you bring in people from your community who you trust, who you have values that are aligned with their ways of thinking and their convictions. And it's a discipleship process for both you and your kiddo. So submitting to others who are both therapists and experts in mental health and sexual wellness, and then also to your brothers and sisters in Christ, right? That are part of your community and saying, like, these are the questions my kid's asking, or these are questions they're not asking. What do I do? To kind of have many voices that you respect there. And then I think being really honest with your kids and being open about the redemptive process in an appropriate way, like, hey, mommy really didn't learn these things, and I'm realizing like God has a lot he wants to heal in me when it comes to my relationship with my body, my understanding of sexuality, and I'm still learning too, and I'm bringing that all before Jesus. And I want you to know you can come talk to me and we'll pray together, and I'm going to get you all the answers you need. So I all of that to say, I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think these are things that, as Christians, I probably said this last time because it's my soapbox, but we're not very good at nuance. We really like the black and white, all or nothing, binary
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And I don't, when I read the scriptures and try to peel off my American lens, I have a really hard time seeing Jesus operating in this black and white, like all or nothing way. Not that sin's not sin, it is. I just think we need to become more comfortable with ambiguity and nuance and really, really good at curiosity and humility in life in general, but especially as parents.
I think a lot of us were raised with this sort of Dobson
Mhm.
parental authority
Mhm.
notion.
Yeah.
And even, where the parents are the ultimate authority, parents have all the answers, you don't question your parents sort of attitude. And while um, I think a lot of my followers are choosing a different path for parenting in very overt sort of ways and turning to things like gentle parenting and respectful parenting and things like that. Guys, gentle parenting is not permissive parenting. I have an episode on parenting that you can go back and listen to. I think sometimes that attitude of, well, parents are supposed to have all of the answers, our kids shouldn't question us, creeps in ways like thinking that we should have all of the answers for sexuality and things and just be ready to give all of those answers like all the time. And one
Mhm.
of the things that I like to say is there's almost no parenting emergencies. you
Right.
know so if your kid asks you a question and you get caught like a deer in the headlights, like it's okay to be like, I'm not really sure how I want to answer that. I'm going to come back to it.
Yeah.
Like, I will come back to you tomorrow with an answer.
Right.
And then you have to like come back to them. Don't brush them
Yeah.
off.
You do have to circle back. Yeah.
One of the big things that I took away from our session, our recording last time that you said was that silence breeds I don't remember how you said it. I should have looked this up. Something along the lines of silence breeds shame. And so
Yeah.
when you avoid your kid's question, you are implying to them that there is something to be ashamed of in the question and the asking.
Yeah.
And that was huge for me,
Right.
um, to just the phrasing of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we underestimate the amount of damage that shame or that silence causes. I'm currently, you know this, I'm currently in the middle of research, which is making me very
Or
sleepy.
Ashley.
But I'm researching the purity culture movement and the impact of that on mothers in particular. And it is so interesting to me the degree of silence or the degree of damage that silence caused more than overt messaging. Like, yeah, the object lessons and all of those things, they weren't great. They didn't do great things to people, they didn't have great outcomes. However, the more confusing piece that people wrestled with and are still wrestling with in marriage was the ambiguity bred by silence and the shame that comes with that. And I just think that's one reason that as moms, all the moms are coming to us saying, "Well, what do we tell our kids?" Because they're swimming in their own pain, in their own experience, the wake of this movement that maybe some of your followers engaged. And it's like we want to do better. Um, and so, yeah, I think being really clear, not panicking over something like a cartoon clitoris, like being able to take deep breaths and just notice our own internal reaction and have a private moment of self-regulating before we put that on our kids um, is important.
Yeah. Well, in with you talking about, having people that you trust that you can speak to you and things like that, I think part of that is also having resources available. Even
Mhm.
like you don't have to, I think bringing the resources into your home, reviewing them as soon as you receive them so that you have them available so that when your kid asks a question that makes you panic, you can say, I have a resource for this. I really like the talk series by Luke Gilkerson. I also recommend the Sex Ed Reclaimed video curriculum series. I will drop the
Yeah.
link for that in the notes. And I think that also, like that curriculum goes back to, what if your kid isn't bringing up the questions? Like that video series is broken down by ages. So,
Hmm.
if you've got a toddler, it's got age appropriate videos for that. If you've got a 15 to 18-year-old, she's got age appropriate videos for 15 to 18-year-olds, and you can watch
Yeah.
them together. I think the answers don't always have to come from, we don't have to carry all the answers
Yeah.
personally.
Another
Um,
great resource if you have kids who are teens, tweens, or teens. I don't know if I don't, you can edit this out if you don't support Preston, but I do like Preston Sprinkle and his ministry, which is he has his own podcast, Theology in the Raw, but he has a whole curriculum for that for teenagers on sexual development. And they're wrestling with just different things that we never wrestled with, really, when you think of the culture we were raised in.
mhm.
They're up against, you know, polyamory and robot sex. Like they're encountering different things. So
Yeah,
I think having a relevant resource like Sprinkles material could be really helpful for parents who don't know where to begin because it's like episodes you watch together with your kiddo and then talk
mhm.
about, which can also take some of the pressure off the parents.
I just recorded an episode on dating, and I'm like, I can't imagine trying to date now. Oh my gosh, our kids. I feel so bad with all of the, sextortion and, which leads us into another really great question about one of the major issues that our kids today are facing is pornography. We had an incident in our school district where a kindergartner was being forced to watch pornography on the school bus by like a fourth grader. Um,
Okay.
and I my I'm just I it makes me speechless. So the question is, how do we steer them away from porn without shame, as it's everywhere and it's so easy to access? And how do we steer them away from it with also not stirring up curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Unfortunately, you're right. So many of our kids are going to be exposed to um, pornography at an early age or are at risk of that. And you and I talked last time about starting this conversation early, right? Being really clear
Mm-hmm.
as babies of what, babies, I say. The Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior is what I'm referring to. They do a great job kind of walking through language surrounding pornography. They also have one, I don't know what the one above that is called. It's not Junior, I guess. It's just
No,
Good
it's just
Pictures.
good pictures, bad pictures.
Okay. I'm looking up. There's another one to that series for counselors, for helping professionals. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Guidebook for Counseling Kids. It's a little bit more expensive and it is for professionals. However, I do think it does a really good job of breaking, and this isn't really specifically what you asked, but breaking down a response should we be told by our children that they had seen or they have seen pornography or been exposed to pornography. Gives a great kind of framework for how you can respond to that in a way that is appropriate. When it comes to talking about pornography without shame, I find with kiddos, if we start the conversation early, it's not going to be as weird when we bring it up later. And um, if we don't bring it up early, that's okay too. It's okay if you haven't brought that up and now you're realizing, oh shoot, this is a subject I need to talk about. That those books we've referenced can really help um, frame up that conversation for you. But I think emphasizing God's yes and the beauty of sex and the purpose of sex, and then also normalizing curiosity, normalizing the role that curiosity plays in learning, and that will help reduce shame just by saying we're all curious. Like, of course you're curious. Of course you wanted to know about, that. That makes sense to me. And when we see this material, it's actually cheapening what God created. It's not real what we're seeing. It's fake. It's not authentic. It's not when clients come to me, I'll tell them that's like watching, actually, this is from Emily Nagoski. It's like watching NASCAR, right? To learn how to drive. That analogy doesn't fit perfectly because it doesn't. But I think being able to normalize the curiosity is probably the biggest piece.
That is so huge. I can you talk I think people hear like normalized curiosity and they're like, oh, yeah, it makes sense. But can you give maybe a couple examples of what that might look like in the moment? Because
Yeah.
I know a lot of people freak out and get really like they have their own big feelings when their kid asks something. Like their first reaction is, where did you hear that? What, how do you know that word? What do you mean? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a normal reaction for parents, but like, how do we normalize curiosity?
How do you normalize curiosity? Um, One thing I tell my kids every year when they go back to school is all bodies are good bodies. All bodies are different, and it's okay to have questions about other bodies. As a way of normalizing the fact that we're humans and we look at one another, and curiosity is a path to learning. And actually can be a path to learning about, you know, God's glory and our creation and is meant to lead us into a space of worship. So I like to lay the foundation of that. And then if I notice, and you'll notice, right? If you're like walking in the mall and you see your kiddo looking at something, or I was watching YouTube, which I don't often do, but I got caught in the rabbit hole. And my son was looking over my shoulder and an ad popped up and it was like a bikini ad because it's summer. And I saw his little face, looking and inquisitive. And so I think in moments like that, just taking a beat and a breath and hitting pause and saying, "Hey, bud, like, I am so sorry. In fact, in this situation, I said, I normally skip commercials because I want to make sure everything you see are good pictures and that they make you feel comfortable. So I'm really sorry if that made you feel uncomfortable. Do you?" And I check in with them probably beyond what they want me to because I'm a sex therapist and that is what I do, I guess. But like, hey, do you have any questions about other people's bodies? It's really normal for those questions to come up. In this instant with the bikini situation, he was like, no, and walked away. So I'm not going to pick at that, you know, I'm just going to let it
Mm.
sit. And one day when I say, do you have any questions about other people's bodies? My prayer and hope would be that either of them could say, yeah, what happens when, you know, a penis gets erect, or what happens when, and they already know some of these things, but um, it frames that. I mean, it creates context for them to even ask about people with varying abilities, people who utilize different forms of support, um, whether it's a wheelchair or, you know, something else at school. Like it helps to normalize that so that they know they can come to me with, of course, sex related questions, but all questions about other people's bodies.
That actually leads into another listener question that we have. They said, my kid knows about their anatomy and needing a sperm and an egg. How do we actually describe intercourse in a matter of fact way, but not open the door to too much curiosity? People are really afraid of opening doors to curiosity. And here we are trying to normalize curiosity.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that we fear opening doors to curiosity, and really curiosity is it's just there. And with some kids it's going to be more pronounced than others.
I
But
one of the phrases that I learned in the University of TikTok is morally neutral. And from Casey Davis, who, you know, her phrase is mess is morally neutral. But in this instance, I think that we should emphasize the fact that curiosity is morally neutral.
correct.
There's nothing sinful in your child being curious.
And it doesn't have to be a path toward sin any more than
Right.
it has to be a path toward worship. Curiosity is the process of learning. That's how we learn as humans. And villainizing or demonizing learning feels unhelpful. So yeah, all of that to say, I mean, the question's valid. That makes sense to me. I mean, it is scary to think, oh gosh, I don't want to teach my kids about, you know, well, you know, something very dangerous. But that in and of itself is like, oh, well, why do we think this is dangerous? Why do we think pleasure is dangerous? And of course, we want to teach sex within the bounds of marriage is beautiful and good, and pleasure is very normal and very good and meant to drive us to Jesus. And here's what the context of pleasure can look like in our lives. And I'm not going to go off on a tangent. I could. Um, I think these concepts can be applied, and I would recommend you start applying them to principles that don't involve sex. Like cookies are good. Maybe we won't eat the whole package. Cookies, that brings us pleasure, right? Like talking about gluttony, talking about other things, because for some reason, as Christians, those don't carry as much charge when we talk about those sorts of sins.
We all know that sex is the church's pet sin.
Yeah. So being able to talk about these concepts and then let them bleed into to the sex teaches some congruence and integration of self, which can be really helpful. But if you're talking to your kiddo, I mean, I would really encourage you to not fear curiosity, but to be really excited about their curiosity and to make sure you get to be the person they engage curiosity with first and encourage them to come. If you make them curious, fantastic. Let them know you are the resource for when curiosity comes up and wants to play. Like go to parent, don't go to the internet, don't go to friend, go to parent. Um, and saying like, hey, yeah, the sperm is actually a little piece of daddy's body. An egg lives in mommy's body, and the penis goes into, it becomes erect, it becomes hard, and then it enters into the vagina, and he ejaculates sperm. So the sperm will then go into the vagina and fertilize the egg, and that's how that happens. Being able to say it in very plain terms. One thing I'm noticing, and I'm going to come back to talk about my research maybe one day if I'm invited, but
You're invited. I've already invited you like 5 times.
the the amount of people I'm talking to who are given biology lessons but nothing else is really interesting to me. And so one thing that I really hope to figure, I don't know that I'll ever figure this out, but I do think an integration of not just the biology, but like in being able to integrate some of the emotional pieces of sex. Like you want them to understand the biology, but you also want them to understand it's more than biology. Like that's why God calls us to engage in this in marriage, because it creates life, and um, love creates life, and that's beautiful and it's powerful, right? Just like a fire can be powerful. So,
Yeah. I think a lot of people think, well, if I explain how intercourse works, like the actual act of it, like that's going to bring up all of the other things, like the emotional implications and things that you were just referencing. But
mhm,
I th- I think that's because we're looking at it from an adult lens, whereas the conversation that I referenced earlier with my kid after our last podcast recording, it was seriously like 2 hours later, guys. I was in a state. Um, is I think that subject came up of the actual, because my son was like, well, I don't like, how does the sperm get to the egg? And I very much, like Ashley said, I was like, well, blood flows into a man's penis and it gets hard. And then he is able to put it inside of the woman's vaginal canal. And then the sperm comes out and it travels up the fallopian tubes, just like because he has seen the videos of a sperm fertilizing an egg. And that satisfied him. He didn't want all of the other, um,
information. Yeah.
like emotional uh stuff. He didn't, like I didn't have to spend that time talking about like sexual coercion and consent and all of that. He literally wanted just, how does thing A get to point B?
Yeah.
That was the question. And for kids, I think if you start with the most simplistic
Yeah.
answer that you can give and then see what other things they ask is
Yeah.
okay.
And what they already know. And then
Yeah.
continue the conversation. I think that
Yeah.
the most damage that I've seen in people is when it was only one conversation, and that one
Hmm.
conversation consisted of here's how an egg and a sperm connect. And that was the extent of it. Um, but being child led in this area is so important. So you don't overwhelm or overshare.
And I think that's where a lot of parent fear comes in, is the, um, well, if I let them know it's okay to ask this one question, then they're going to ask 17 more, but I don't want to give them the other 17 answers yet. And I just don't see that happening consistently in people that I'm talking to. I think kids really just want the question that they're asking you.
Yeah. Concrete, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. If they ask it, that means they're curious about it. And if you don't answer, they're going to find an answer because kids are determined. Um,
Yes.
so I think, yeah, you're right.
I think what I'm realizing from the podcast that we've recorded together, what I'm realizing is that parents are the ones that are making this the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Parents are the ones that are making this so much more dramatic than the kid is just vibing, living their life.
Yeah. Just,
It-
yeah.
um, Okay. Another really good listener question that we had was, how do we balance letting our kids know what the Bible says about waiting for marriage without bringing shame into it? And how do you teach the difference between shame and conviction? Because I feel like this question kind of distills the essence of purity culture, of purity, because purity culture, if you guys are not familiar with what purity culture is, we talked about that in the first episode. Uh, Check that one out. But I think the essence of purity culture was sex outside of marriage will send you straight to hell, but also in a really shameful, controlling way. And so, how do we honor the biblical, sex is for marriage, but it's so twisted with shame in so many people's brains now. How do we teach our kids without that shame? That concept.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, the difference between conviction and shame is so important to begin discussing as soon as possible, right? Like shame says I am bad, conviction says I made a mistake and can go back to Jesus. Um, Shame leads you to isolation because you're bad and you don't belong. Conviction leads you to the cross and to a place of love and connection with others. And so I think helping kiddos, and I'm a big fan of somatic work with kids, meaning tuning into the body, knowing, oh, anger lives here in my body. Um, Happiness lives here. I I remember going to the park with my kids and I was pushing them on the swing and they asked for an underdog, when you like push them and you run under and they were taking turns and they were so excited. And so we paused and we noticed where our yes was in our body when they said, I want an or do you want an underdog? Like, and they said, yes, where does your yes live in your body? Like, that means consent. That means okay. That's a green light. You want that. So starting in that way with teaching body awareness is really important. And so being able to figure out conviction lives like in my gut or in my heart, and shame makes me recoil usually and like fold into myself, kind of being able to identify that, teaching them that. But then also like, hey, God designed sex because it's so powerful, and the best context for that power is marriage. That's where he wants it to be and to exist. And it's so beautiful no matter what. It's so beautiful. It's just God created it for marriage. And I'm sure this is going to be an object lesson thing where in 20 years I'm going to be like, I should have never said that. But I do like the like fire belongs in a fire pit, it can like jump out of the fire pit and create a lot of damage sometimes. But it's best within the confines of this fire pit. And so I think that we can utilize some language. I try to be really careful with object lessons because we're working with an entire generation that's been deeply damaged by them. But appropriate metaphors and saying, like, God designed this for marriage and that's the best place for it to happen is really important. And also, I think it's just really empowering. One thing that I think is important is to empower our kids to live in their own bodies and make their own choices with their bodies as they get older so that they can learn to trust themselves in their bodies. And I remember when my mom was teaching me, she actually did this really well, which is ultimately why I got here. And most people were like, did something insanely bad happen to you as you were growing up? Like, what led you to this field? No, my parents actually did really well. And what was different is my mom said, like, hey, yeah, this belongs in marriage. Like, God, that's God's beautiful design. And at the end of the day, that's your choice. And that felt really empowering and helped me to feel really big and grown up and responsible for my own body, which ultimately really helped, I think. Now, I know that's not going to apply for everyone, but I think normalizing curiosity, letting people know God's beautiful design for sex, and then also that sex is just beautiful. Like it just is. I think you had a question about, I don't know if you want to talk, I don't know, the teen mom question, but like, you know, I
So we had a question. How do you teach that sex is a beautiful gift for marriage when you were a teen mom yourself? And I think those questions really tie together.
yeah, yeah. You know, I'm still wrestling. I'm wrestling with all of this, guys. Like I devoted my whole life studying this right now, and I'm wrestling with it so much. But one thing I do currently sit with, this could change. Um, before the Lord is that sex is beautiful. It is beautiful. It is meant for marriage, and sex is beautiful. It creates life, and life is beautiful to the Lord. Um, and I think to be able to say, you know what, before I knew Jesus, like I made, or before, when I was a teenager, I made this choice and God gifted me because he makes beauty from ashes, right? So even sometimes in our most like poor choices, he will gift us with mercy and grace, and we will get beauty from it. And here's some of the beautiful things that I got. Um, I got the kiddo who is a life that's beautiful. And then I got all these lessons that God's formed in me and taught me. And then also saying like there were also moments that were really hard because I wasn't in a marriage. And here are some of those things that have been hard. Um, to help bring reasoning and understanding for why marriage makes sense. Uh,
I think that kind of goes back to, my theory with the Dobson and, parents are supposed to have all the answers and everything, is that I think sometimes that we as parents are afraid to admit to our own failures in front of our kids,
mm,
because of our shame. And so I think that, if you are in that situation, and I've had friends in that situation, and I've watched them walk through that conversation, and, they talked about, I never regret having you, but our lives would have been much different if it had happened in a different time, and talking about the things that were hard about that. Um,
yeah. I mean, I will never want to cheapen the cross. So I want to share what's appropriate from my story, the places of redemption where God's entered in and brought healing with my kids. I think to parent from a place of denial of those moments and those hardships is to parent from a place of pride. And that's
mhm.
going to lead to downfall. So um, I think
Somebody's boomer parent needs to hear that today.
being able to lead with that, with our own curiosity and our own compassion and self awareness and humility, is a gift to give our children. And to be able to say, yeah, I'm still in process. I'm still making mistakes. In fact, let me tell you some of the mistakes I made and why Jesus matters, and the powerful things he can do in your life. Why would we stand on a stage and share our testimony with people if we're not going to like start with our kids? That's beyond me, but yeah. Soapbox, sorry.
No, I think that goes back to the research that you're conducting very well, and why some of the parents of our generation made the choices that they did. And I want to be clear that, for I think the majority of parents who promoted purity culture and things like that were doing the best they could with the information that they had, and
Yeah. Good
weren't
intentions.
actively trying to cause harm. But I think it's, what they, if they've acknowledged that harm was caused, is where people are starting to run into complications of
Yeah.
problems. Okay, this one was so, so good, because I have gotten so many stories related to this question. How to process with a child if they catch their parents in the act. So I had, when we were much younger, we didn't have kids yet. We had friends that were thought that their kids were busy playing video games. Made activities like, I think she was on top of him,
Hmm.
fully engaged in activities. Their door busts open and their kid runs in, and he just kind of stands there for a second, and he goes, "Mom, I just want to tell you I won a trophy in Mario Kart Pie," and slams the door.
Oh, that's so cute and so funny. Well,
We have cracked up about that story for years. And I know we had an instance when my son was a toddler and we were co sleeping. And, we thought that we had moved him to his bed. We left our door open because we didn't know that he could, like, even previously, if he was in his bed and woke up, he would just lay there and scream for us.
mm,
Well, we wrapped up activities, and I looked, and there's just this little body sitting in my open doorway.
Oh,
And we
baby.
were like, I have no idea how long he had been there.
Oh,
Probably just a couple of minutes, probably didn't really see anything. And he was so very, like, so very, very tiny that there really was no
sure.
conversations to be
Hmm.
had because he was so tiny at that time. But that was a moment that I don't know if this kid ever does regression therapy or something, may come back to bite me one day. I don't know. But that, like, so I think every parent out there has a moment
Hmm.
like this. And if you're watching this on social media right now, drop that in the comments. Like, what is your kid caught you in the act story? Because
Yes,
they're
please.
always inevitably hilarious
Yeah,
for
I agree.
everybody else
Yeah.
listening. So, how do we process with, let's assume it's, not a teeny tiny one who doesn't need to process. What if it's the older kid who just wanted to tell his mom that he won a trophy? Mario Kart. How do we deal with that?
Sweet baby. Well, you give it time, give it a minute, not like days. Give it like a little bit of breathing room so that you can calm down. I respond like coming from a place of reactivity and your own anxiety is usually not the best time to parent or have any conversations, right? Um, so giving it some time, learn like I think that being able to laugh about it is so important because we often put so much pressure on ourselves to be to be perfect, to parent everything perfectly. And that's just not weird. That's not reality. I like to say I'm just trying to be the therapist my kids will deserve one day. Like I am constantly putting money aside for their own therapy because I know I'm going to mess up and they're going to need it. And so then being able to go and say, like, hey, we have talked about sex. We've talked about what it means to share our bodies and how sacred that is. And that's something that's meant for marriage. And so that's why our door was closed, or that's why we had planned for you to not be home. And that's why I've always emphasized privacy. And I just want to apologize. Like, I'm so sorry um, that boundary was broken and that you saw something that you didn't need to see and you didn't want to see. Maybe before this though, to kind of defer back to what you always say, like ask them what they saw and
Hmm.
just get curious because you might be surprised. They might say, "Well, I saw you guys were playing a game, right? Or I saw you guys were wrestling." And I think there's
Hmm.
space here to just play off of that, unless you think they're telling a story because they feel uncomfortable. But being able to say, like, hey, what I was surprised to see you just then. Like, what did you see? Or what did you think about when you walked in? And then from there, being able to kind of, say what I was saying before, where it was like, I'm so sorry that you were exposed to that.
I think too, we as parents forget how very egotistical children are, and not egotistical in the grown-up sense of the definition, but
Yeah,
in the psychological, clinical sense of the definition.
yeah,
Kids exist in their own worlds 100% of the time. It
right.
is a skill that they have to learn that other people, it's not their world that other people enter. They exist
Yeah,
in a larger world. And
yeah,
so, like with the kid with the trophy illustration, like that kid was so completely focused on his own stuff
right. Yeah,
that it's like the parents, it's like a non-player character in video games.
right.
I think kids think
Totally.
of other people as NPCs in their own lives.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand that reference, I'm deeply sorry. But I think that your kid probably didn't see as much as you thought that they saw because they are so egotistical.
Yeah. That's true. I love that Mario Kart story for that reason, right? They're not
Mm-hmm.
worried about what you're doing. They don't care.
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
they had their own mission in mind, and likely they didn't even notice that you were laying there naked on top of each other. And
Yeah.
then being able to ask, and then if they did, work on that, go from there. But um, like normalizing intimacy within marriage. I I have a friend who's like my sister and we parent together. She's my allo parent. And we do life together. And if my kids ever have questions and they don't feel comfortable talking to me about it, which isn't unusual, but what will happen more when they get older, and this would be one of those situations, I give them my phone and say, "Do you want to call Stets, who is their auntie?" Or they will send her a message in another way. So the door's always open there too. I think having relationship, again, it's like the council of many advisors, but also community. That's why we're called to walk in community. Um,
Yes.
to say like, hey, if you don't want to talk about it, I get it. Here's a safe person that you can call.
Yeah, I think that's great too. This actually brings up another question because I see a lot in mom groups. She'll come with a question about sex for
Mhm.
herself. And one of the things that she'll say is, well, I just can't get comfortable having sex with the kids in the house. Or if I suspect the kids will hear us,
Mhm.
not like walk in, not, see us in the act, but even just like hear sounds from the bedroom. And I guarantee you, these are not people who are enacting 50 Shades where you're going to hear the crack of a whip or anything like that. Like this is, I'm talking normal, like the squeak of a bed or a little bit of a moan or something. Like they
Yeah.
can't even. Do you think that it is? And I have my own story related to this. One time we set when my son was a little bit older. He was probably 4 or 5. We set him up with a snack and Daniel Tiger, and we went to the bedroom. And all of a sudden, I hear, "Ma, Daddy, why you make Mama cry?"
Oh,
And then we
baby.
tried to gaslight him that I was laughing.
Oh, good.
I think he kind of bought it, but
Good. That
really
worked.
thought that I was crying. I was like,
Sweet baby.
crying, not in that sense. But do you think that it is like harmful for kids to hear, again, not, some pornographic sounds, but something? Because I think a lot of parents think that their kids are going to be damaged for life just from hearing some normal, low key sounds.
Yeah. Well, this kind of goes back to our to the egocentric piece. Usually kids are not thinking about what that noise is unless it sounds like someone's getting hurt. Um, they might be curious. I I don't think that it's going to create long-term damage if conversation is open and there's places where they can go with their questions and confusion or concerns, and to normalize that within the family system. When when you do feel discomfort, it's always an invitation to tune into yourself and what the Lord might be calling you to dismantle or to build what he wants to build in you, right? If there's shame there, that would be something a lot because most women that I talk to who are afraid of kids hearing, it's actually there's layers of shame beneath that, an embarrassment when
Mhm.
it comes to their um, female sexual pleasure, which is a whole nother episode.
Oh,
But
I
um,
100% endorse this message and agree.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I would wait. I mean, if they have questions, then say, what did you hear? Find out what they do know, what their questions are, clarify that nobody's getting hurt. Um, I hear about this fear all the time. And I think there are things we can do from noise machines and fans and certain things like that. And at the end of the day,
Hmm.
people all over the world, there are cultures where people live in one little hut and they
Yep.
procreate a lot. And so
Hmm.
I think this is very much an American issue, Western issue from my perspective.
It's a
Um,
modern American issue because even, when we think about how America was founded, families were sleeping in one room, when
mhm,
America was founded. This
mhm.
is very much a modern American first
Yeah.
world problem.
Right. And I'm not saying like, oh yeah, you should absolutely just not give any thought to this. I don't think that's true. I just think
Yeah.
we have made a bigger deal about this than it needs to be. And if our kids have questions, they can ask as long as you make them comfortable enough to ask and let them know they
Yeah.
can talk about it. Hmm.
Yeah. No, I fully agree.
Yeah.
And address the shame that led you
Yes.
to ask that question in the first place.
Yeah.
Please go to
Hmm.
therapy. One last question that I thought was really good is people talk about red flags regarding unsafe people and unhealthy relationships. What are the red flags and how do we talk to our kids about them? I feel like this could be a whole like episode by itself, but like how how do we start to have that conversation about red flags and people and relationships?
You know who does a good job of walking through this would be Sheila. She deserves better. I think she does a
Yes.
really good job of walking through these red flags. In fact, I think she has like a checklist or something. But for kiddos, I think starting with the basics, like we don't secrets, we don't take gifts
Mhm.
for sharing our body or sharing our time, boundaries, teaching what boundaries are, that you're the boss of your body, that people have to consent to touch you and they need to consent if you're going to touch them. I think that with each kiddo and each relationship, you can notice dynamics in friendships and point out what seems unhealthy when it seems appropriate to do so. Emotional manipulation, like there are certain things that will unfold when they're more middle school, high school. But when they're little, I think it really honing in on body boundaries and safe touch and no secrets and things of that nature. What am I missing? What do you talk about when you talk to people about this?
I think a lot of parents think that sex education is this whole other topic and conversation and like that's not the same as regular parenting, right?
Right.
And I
Right.
think that so many of the regular parenting things that we do just translates to sex ed, right? So I think
Correct.
about we have a situation, we have the cool house, we have the cool backyard. We have a huge sandbox, we have a trampoline. So
Mm.
we have the good stuff.
Mm.
And so we had a situation where there were kids down the street who were very mean little girls. Very,
Mm.
it was a pack of little girls that were just mean. And my son, being a very sheltered homeschooler, doesn't always catch on to the nuances of public school kid behavior, which is
Mhm.
not a slam towards public school kids at all. It is the fact that there are some behaviors that are taught in the social hierarchy
Mhm.
for kids to survive. And if a kid has never been in that institution, he doesn't realize that there's some social hierarchy stuff happening.
Mhm.
And so there was an instance of like, and so these girls were so mean to him, but then they would like want to come jump on the trampoline or play in our sandbox. And I had to like have it, and my kid is desperate to play with other kids. And so we had to have like this big talk about they just want to use your stuff. Like they don't
Yeah.
actually want to play with you and talking about manipulation, right? Because that was, the word that I
Mhm.
didn't use with him because he
Right.
wasn't, that was a big word for a little guy. But
Yeah.
that's really what the point of the conversation was he
Right.
was being manipulated.
Yeah.
And that translates to sex ed someday, you
Mhm.
know, and talking about recognizing when someone wants to use you for what you have to offer them versus spending time with you for who you are,
Yeah.
right? It's almost
Absolutely.
like the men that don't want to have an emotional relationship with their wives and just want to use them for
Mhm.
orgasms, right?
Mhm.
It's the
Mm.
say you just want to play in her playground, but you don't want to talk to her.
Right.
Um, it's the so like that was a form of sex education for him,
Yeah.
but not branded as such. And so I
Right.
think if parents can start for themselves normalizing, sometimes just sex ed is just parenting.
Right. It can be more integrated than we allow
Yeah,
it to be sometimes. Mhm.
that would be my take on that question is
Yeah.
I think you've been doing it, but you don't realize that you've been doing it. Hopefully you've been doing it without realizing
Right.
that you're doing it. Okay.
Right.
Do you have any last thoughts or suggestions or anything on raising sexually healthy children?
I don't think so. I mean, I think for so many of us, the jury's out, right? We're all in process. We're all doing our best. And I tell all mamas that all parents, their hot mess is good enough. the Lord will bless their humility and their curiosity when they bring it to Him. So I guess I just pray that your listeners will be able to access the support they need. And I'll send you that one link to the book I mentioned that I hadn't sent you before.
Yes, that'd be great. Make sure that you check out the show notes for this episode, because I will list all kinds of resources for you there. And make sure that you go have good sex. That's it for today's episode. You've been blessed and probably slightly scandalized. Now go journal, go text your man, and most of all, don't keep this to yourself. Share it, review it, slide into my DMs. Then grab a journal, a game, or a coaching spot. And remember, Jesus didn't die for you to have boring sex. So go have good sex already.